Welcome. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to model texture and make decals. So, I've broken the whole modeling process down into 4 parts. We'll start off by making the big forms of the front part of the TV. To make the wooden frame, I'll draw a rectangle with the tube tool. Make sure to activate the closed option, then tap on the green dot to add thickness and activate profile to change it from round to square. Then I'll decrease the radius, lower the poly count and scale it in Z-axis. Now I'm gonna clone it before validating to make the inner frame. Then I'll scale it in Z-axis again and edit the profile to create this slope. And then finally subdivide it. Now moving on and adding a plane to create the bezel. Look carefully how I do it. After adjusting the size, I'm gonna mask the part I don't need with the cell mask and invert it. And then split it with the masked parts, closing action shed to shell, which will separate the masked part from the unmasked part and add thickness to the masked part. Then I'll simply get rid of this part. Now it's time to create the TV screen, which is double curved. So to achieve that, I've added a cube, lowered the poly count all the way to 0 and then subdivided it a few times, which turned it into a sphere, but with good topology. Then with the cell mask and lasso selection, I'm drawing this shape and splitting it like I did with the bezel. Then I've added a box and placed it on the right. This is where the knobs and the speaker grill will be placed. Since I have to add details, I'll increase the poly count by subdividing. Now let's start to add details to the front part of the TV. So now I'm drawing a rectangular mask using the cell mask and inverting it. Then with the regular mask and this alpha, stroke type set to lock radius, drawing this mask pattern for the speaker grill. And then just pushing the unmasked part with the gizmo. For the knob slots, I used the same technique but with circle selection tool. Now to create the knob, I've added a cylinder and reduced the height and subdivided it a couple of times. Since I have to add details with the cell mask, I'm covering the top and the bottom. Then I'll simply add the grooves with the stamp brush and the same alpha. But before that, I'll enable radial symmetry in Y-axis and set the method to local to add those grooves around the knobs. For the top part of the knob, I'm adding in a box and changing its height and width first and then lowering the poly count so that I can change its shape with the move brush like this. Quite easy, right? But then I'm subdividing it a few times to achieve this rounded look. Then with the trim tool, I'm trimming the lower part like this. Then I'll just join these two and voxel remesh and then clean it up with the smooth brush. And then scale it down and place it in the right position. As I mentioned in my previous tutorials, it's always a good idea to look at references when you are working on a model. Pros do it, so there's no reason for us to not do it, right? It'll make your models and works more believable in general. And finally, I've added a cylinder to add the small knob at the bottom. Now, let's start modeling the back part. I'm adding a box, changing its height and width to match the front part. Then lowering the poly count and with the cell mask and gizmo experimenting with the shape until I find something I'm happy with. As you can see, I'm using shell mask brush constantly, because it's one of the most important tool in Nomad. So if you want to know more about cell mask, make sure to check out this tutorial after watching this. I'll put the link in the description. So now I'm adding a simple cube, lowering the poly count, masking and creating this shape with the gizmo. Nice and simple. Now look carefully. I'm about to perform a Boolean operation. I'm gonna use this cube to subtract the intersecting area from this large back part. For that, let's select both of them and hide the smaller cube and simply tap on Boolean. And it's done. Nice and clean, right? Now I'll just join these two and voxel remesh and use the smooth brush like the previous one to clean it up. Now let's add details to the back. So I'll use the regular mask brush, stroke type set to lock radius with this alpha. Then I'll simply invert the mask and then push the unmasked area with the move gizmo. And we have managed to create these groups with ease. Now I'm drawing a straight line with the tube tool for the antenna and then decreasing the radius, and finally with the cell mask and gizmo tweaking the shape like this. For the antenna holder, I've added a cube and trimmed out this shape like this. Again, with the cell mask brush, I'm masking out this area, inverting it, and with the gizmo pushing it in to create the slot for the wire. Same process for this. Now let's create the 2-pin plug. I'm adding a cube, lowering the poly count, and with the cell mask and gizmo creating the shape of the plug like this. Once I'm happy with the shape, I add more polygon with linear subdivision checked, which will add polygons without deforming the model. And then uncheck it to add some natural bevel. For the pin, I've added a cube, and with the trim tool I'm masking a hole like this. Then I'll just clone it and join them together. Now I'm simply drawing a line with the tube tool and then adding some points to add some curvature to the wire. And then editing the profile to make this shape for the wire. Then for the sticky notes, I'm drawing this with the tube tool and changing its profile from round to square, and then simply editing the profile to make it thinner, since papers are thin, right? Now with my screw brush, I'm making the screw with ease. If you want to learn how to make your own brush, check out this tutorial I've made. Link will be in the description. Now it's time to create the embossed text. For that, I'm first creating a text image like this. You can use any photo editing app for this. And then on a separate box in Nomad, I'm gonna use this text as alpha for the regular mask. Pay attention to the setting. First, I'm changing the stroke type to lock radius, then importing the text as alpha. Then changing the preset to this horizontal line. and finally enabling the front facing vertex only. This is important. By checking this box, now I'm just drawing the mask by dragging. Then just hitting extract with the shell turned on and deleting the box. Now it's time for texturing the model. The first thing I do is change the material from matcap to PBR. Then apply specific materials by selecting each part. I'll set the metalness to 1 if the object is made of metal. For non-metal materials, I'll set it to 0. The roughness slider controls how reflective the surface of the material is. The lower the number, the shinier the surface. Also, you can change the color of the material. Once I'm happy with the material, this is the base material by the way, I'll tap on Paint All to apply it to the selected object. So my approach to texturing in Nomad has changed quite a lot since the new 1.85 update, with the UV map being pre-unwrapped and all. So I wouldn't add the wooden texture this way anymore, but some of the techniques you are seeing now are still relevant. I'll definitely make tutorials on my new approach to texturing, but for now let's look at the techniques that are still relevant. Like adding roughness with the paintbrush to break up the evenness of the texture like this. Masking part of an object with the cell mask and then applying a different material to the unmasked part like this. So first I'm applying a material to the object, then leaving the parts I want to apply new materials to unmasked and applying new materials. Nice and simple. Now let's add the decals. Now for this decal, I used an app called Fonto, which is Phonto. It allows you to add text to a photo. Then I simply imported it as color base for the material, and with the paintbrush, stroke type set to lock radius like I showed earlier, placed it in the slot like this. Now I hand wrote this for the sticky note decal in Infinite Painter. You could use Procreate for this too. Anyway, then I applied the decal the same way I did the number decals. And that concludes our tutorial. So feel free to ask any question you have about the tutorial or 3D in general. I'll try my best to answer. I'll make more process videos and tutorials like this, so please consider subscribing if you don't want to miss them. And as always, thank you very much for watching.